The ISS Valiant sliced through the void, its hull gleaming against the cold expanse. The distress signal had been weak, nearly lost in the cosmic background radiation, but its origin had sent ripples of unease through the command deck. It was Exalnar frequency, the galactic overlords, the untouchable tyrants. And yet here they were, answering a distress call from one of the most advanced warships in existence. Commander Doran Holt stood at the bridge, arms crossed, watching as the wreckage came into view. The Salnar dreadnought, once a leviathan of war, now drifted in eerie silence, its hull split open like a gutted beast. No power signatures, no life signs, Lieutenant Arden reported from the sensor array. Just floating debris. Doesn't mean it's empty, Holt muttered, his gut twisted. The Salnar were arrogant bastards, convinced of their own invincibility. Something had proven them wrong. The crew operated in tense silence. The Valiant was a Terran warship, built for deep space encounters and hardened against the galaxy's deadliest threats. But this? A Salnar dreadnought, reduced to cosmic scrap. It was unnatural. Prep a boarding team, Holt ordered. I want to see what killed these bastards. A silent tome. The boarding shuttle glided through the wreckage, magnetic clamps latching onto the dreadnought's ruined hull. The airlock hissed open, and the team moved in, rifles raised, visors scanning for movement. Inside, the corridors were a graveyard. Walls were scorched and clawed, not from plasma fire, but something else. Something that had physically torn through metal like paper. The lights flickered dimly, barely illuminating the carnage. Corpses lay twisted in unnatural positions. Salnar bodies, once feared warriors, were ripped open, their sleek, armored exoskeletons shattered. Holt knelt by one, studying the gaping wounds. No plasma burns, no blade strikes. His voice was grim. Whatever did this, it didn't use weapons. The sound of static crackled through their comms. Commander, I think we found something. Arden's voice came through. Survivor, Med Bay. The last Salnar. Med Bay door had been sealed from the inside, but the security locks had failed in the dreadnought's final moments. It took a well-placed blast from a breaching charge to force it open. Inside, amidst overturned equipment and dim emergency lighting, a single figure cowered in the corner. Dekis. His 4 eyes, 2 large primaries, 2 smaller secondaries, locked onto the humans. His chitinous skin was cracked, his breathing ragged. His terror was unmistakable. Holt stepped forward, lowering his weapon slightly. He's injured. Vekis flinched, pressing himself against the wall. His mandibles clicked in distress. No, not you. Not Deathworlders. His voice was strained, as if he could barely believe what he was seeing. Holt narrowed his eyes. Not us? Then what the hell was he running from? A shadow shifted behind them. A wet, chittering sound echoed through the ruined Med Bay. The hairs on Holt's neck stood up. Something else was here. The nightmare awakens. The lights overhead flickered again. Then the darkness moved. Holt spun, rifle raised, as a shape unfolded from the ceiling, limbs bending the wrong way, biomechanical plating glistening in the dim light. It was watching them, studying them, a predator analyzing its prey. Then it dropped. The first Marine never had a chance. It was too fast. The creature tore through his armor like wet fabric, claws slicing through reinforced plating. Blood sprayed against the bulkhead. Suantact. Holt roared, opening fire. A corridor exploded with light and sound, plasma rounds lancing through the air, tearing into the Nightmare's chitinous hide. It barely slowed. It moved through the squad like a living storm, weaving between them with horrifying grace, adapting to their patterns. Holt's mind raced. This wasn't just a monster. This was an apex predator. And they had just stepped into its den. Fall back, now. The team scrambled toward the exit, dragging the injured with them. Vekis, still dazed, barely managed to keep up. The creature did not pursue immediately. It crouched in the shadows, watching them go, as if letting them flee was part of the hunt. The realization made Holt's blood run cold. Escape? For now. They made it back to the boarding shovel, slamming the airlock shut as something slammed into the outer hull. The ship shuddered under the impact. "We're not alone," Arden shouted over the alarms. "That thing's coming with us." Holt strapped in, jaw clenched. They were bringing the Nightmare with them. "Get us back to the Valiant. Full burn. Now." A thrusters ignited, and the shuttle shot towards safety. Behind them, the Salnar dreadnought faded into the void, its last secrets swallowed by the endless dark. But the Nightmare had only just begun. The boarding shuttle rocketed toward the Valiant, the emergency thrusters pushing beyond safety limits. Commander Holt gritted his teeth as the ship bucked under the strain, his eyes locked on the monitors. Something was on their hull. Inside the cramped shuttle, the team moved with trained efficiency, securing the injured and reloading their weapons. The air was thick with tension, the sound of ragged breathing, and the occasional groan of pain the only noise. Vekis huddled against the bulkhead, trembling. The Salnar scientist had been on the verge of death when they found him, but now he looked worse than before, not from wounds, but pure terror. His mandibles clicked erratically, his secondary eyes darting to every shadow. Holt didn't have time to deal with him. "Status?" he barked. "2 dead, 3 wounded, and whatever that thing was, it hitched a ride," Arden growled. She was securing her rifle, checking charge levels. "It's clamped to the hull. Heat readings are spiking. It's cutting through." A horrible screeching sound vibrated through the walls, metal being carved apart. "We're 5 minutes from docking," the pilot reported, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. "We need tow." Something punched through the ceiling. A black limb, thin yet impossibly strong, pierced the metal like it was soft clay. Sparks rained as the lights flickered, and then, with an ear-splitting shriek, the ceiling ripped open. The creature dropped into the shovel. "The hunt begins." "Movie." Holt dove back as the thing unfolded, joints bending in unnatural directions, plated exoskeleton glistening in the dim red emergency lights. It wasn't just fast, it anticipated them. A Marine fired point blank. The creature twisted sideways, avoiding the shot by millimeters, then lunged. A flash of claws, teeth, and blood. The Marine barely had time to scream. "Contain it!" Arden roared, opening fire. Udal erupted in a blinding storm of plasma and kinetic rounds. The walls glowed red-hot from the impacts, but the creature moved between the shots, its body twisting unnaturally. Then it vanished. Holt's breath came in ragged gasps. His visor flickered as his HUD scanned the shadows, searching. The shuttle was too small. Too many blind spots. He took a slow step forward. His boots splashed in something warm. Blood. A whisper of movement. He spun, too late. The nightmare was already behind them. Sacrifice and survival. The creature tore into the squad, forcing them into close combat. Holt barely had time to process as another Marine was yanked off his feet, dragged screaming into the darkness. Vekis let out a choked sound, his body locking up in sheer terror. "You don't understand," he rasped. It's learning." Holt didn't have time for philosophy. He raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Arden made her move. With a snarl, she grabbed a detonation charge from her belt and lunged at the creature. "Get out of here." "No, Arden. WAIT." Too late. She slammed the charge against the thing's torso just as it turned on her. The last thing Holt saw before the explosion was her defiant grin. Then fire and chaos. Impact. Shuttle shook violently. The emergency decompression alarms blared as air rushed out through the hole Arden's sacrifice had torn open. The creature was gone, either blown away or in pieces. Holt slammed his fist against the control panel. "Pilot, get us docked now. Coming in hot," the pilot yelled. The shuttle slammed into the Valiant's hangar, skidding across the deck before coming to a dead halt. The moment the doors opened, emergency crews rushed in. Medics pulled out the wounded while Holt stumbled forward, his ears ringing, his mind racing. Arden was gone. The creature was gone. Something was wrong. The Valiant security officer ran up, face pale. "Sir, you need to see this." Holt wiped the blood from his face and followed, heart pounding. The horror is not over. The hangar was too quiet. Then Holt saw the damage. Deep, claw-like gouges lined the walls of the docking bay. Holt's blood turned to ice. The creature wasn't on the shuttle anymore. It was already inside the Valiant. He turned sharply, barking orders. "Lock down this ship, now." But even as he spoke, the ship's lights dimmed for a fraction of a second. Then came the first scream. The screams echoed through the Valiant, sharp and desperate over the ship's comms. Holt sprinted toward the bridge, his mind racing. The nightmare hadn't been left behind. It was here, loose on the ship. Emergency klaxons blared, casting the corridors in flashing red light. Every flicker of shadow, every metallic creak set his nerves on edge. His rifle was already raised, finger hovering over the trigger. "Lock down all sections." Holt barked into his comm. "That thing is on board." Static crackled. Then Arden's replacement on security, Lieutenant Drex, came through, voice tight with panic. "Sir, it's moving through the vents. We've lost contact with Deck 7 and..." The line cut. A chill ran through Holt's spine. Deck 7 housed the reactor core. The thing got in there. "Move!" he barked, signaling his remaining Marines forward. The team raced through the corridors, boots slamming against the metal floor. They passed bodies, some torn apart, others dragged into the darkness, trails of blood marking their fate. The Valiant had top-tier security measures, but this thing didn't care. It wasn't a wild animal. It was a hunter. It was thinking. And it was winning. Earthfall. They reached the reactor chamber just in time to see the beast rip into a technician. The man barely had time to scream before his body snapped like a dry twig. The thing didn't even eat him. It just killed and moved on, crawling toward the reactor controls. Oh, hell no. Arden's second in command, Surgeon Vance, growled. He raised his rifle. Up! The corridor erupted with gunfire. Plasma rounds slammed into the creature's biomechanical exoskeleton, sizzling against its blackened plating. It screeched, not in pain, but annoyance. Then it moved. Vance didn't even get to react. The creature closed the distance in a heartbeat, its clawed limbs spearing straight through his chest. Holt fired point blank, the muzzle flash illuminating the creature's horrific, eyeless face. Boom! The shot tore into its side, sending it staggering back. The team unleashed everything, pushing it away from the reactor controls. Sparks rained as bullets and plasma bursts ripped through the chamber. Then Holt saw what the thing had done. The control panel was slashed open, systems failing. The reactor, already running at critical levels, was overloading. Holt's blood turned to ice. The core was going to blow. And if it did, it would take them all with it. A desperate escape. This ship's finished, Holt growled. Everyone to the escape pods. Now. Sir. That thing? It's either we die here, or we take our chances planetside. The team didn't hesitate. They bolted for the emergency bays, dragging the wounded. Holt slammed his hand against his comms. All surviving crew, abandoned ship. Repeat, abandoned ship. The Valiant shuddered violently. Warning klaxons screamed as the reactor meltdown entered its final phase. Holt cast one last glance at the reactor chamber. The beast was gone. Not dead, just gone. Which meant it was coming with them. The fall to Earth. The escape pods launched in rapid succession, streaking toward the planet below. Holt strapped himself in, heart hammering as the pod shook violently from re-entry. Through the viewport, he saw the Valiant, a massive burning wreck spiraling toward the atmosphere. Then, in a blinding flash, the reactor detonated. The explosion engulfed the ship, sending a shockwave through the sky. Pieces of molten debris rained down, turning the dark void into a brief, hellish inferno. Holt clenched his jaw. There was no time to mourn. Survival came first. He glanced at his scanner. Several escape pods had made it. But one of them carried the monster, and nobody knew which one. Stranded on the Deathworld. Pods slammed into the ground, dirt and debris exploding outward. Holt's harness strained against his chest as the pods skidded across the landscape, finally coming to a smoking halt. For a moment, there was silence. Then a loud guttural roar. Holt blinked through the haze, reaching for his rifle. He unlatched his harness and kicked open the hatch, stumbling into the light of an alien sun. He expected barren rock, a wasteland. Instead, It was Earth. He staggered, staring at the lush green wilderness, the towering trees, the distant snow-capped mountains. This wasn't just any world. They had crashed on humanity's homeworld. Holt let out a slow breath. They weren't the only ones here. Somewhere in the jungle, the nightmare had survived. And now it was loose on Earth. Holt pulled himself to his feet, his boots sinking slightly into damp earth. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and rich soil, and the distant cry of some unknown bird echoed through the trees. They had survived the crash. So had it. He took a slow breath, surveying the immediate area. Dense forest. No sign of human civilization. His pod's exterior was scorched from re-entry, one of the thrusters buried deep in the mud. The others had landed somewhere nearby, their emergency beacons flashing faintly in the distance. The Valiant was gone. Their ship, their firepower, their way home, all of it had been reduced to burning wreckage in orbit. And now, somewhere in this wilderness, the apex predator that slaughtered the Salma was loose. Holt's grip tightened on his rifle. Earth had its own monsters. But now it had something worse. Regroup and survive. Holt's comm crackled with static before a familiar voice broke through. Commander Holt, this is Arden's team. Anyone alive out there? Holt tapped his wrist comm. Reading you, Lieutenant. I'm on the ground. Status? A moment's pause, then, we'd got survivors. Maybe 24, some wounded. We're about 3 clicks east of your signal. Holt exhaled slowly. At least some of them had made it. Sit tight, he ordered. I'm on my way. Keep your weapons ready. That thing is here, and it's hunting. The jungle stalks. Moving through the wilderness was slow going. The terrain was uneven, thick roots and underbrush making every step dangerous. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the towering trees. Holt's every instinct screamed at him. He was being watched. Something was here. Silent. Waiting. A faint chitinous clicking drifted through the air. Holt froze. His rifle came up instantly, sweeping across the dense foliage. The sound was close. Too close. Then movement. A blur of motion from the canopy above. Holt dove sideways just as something massive crashed down where he had stood. The ground shook from the impact. He rolled onto his back, rifle snapping up. And there it was. The apex predator. Crouched before him, its body partially camouflaged against the forest. Its insectoid plating rippled, adapting to the environment with an almost liquid-like precision. Its head tilted, mandibles twitching, studying. Holt knew that look. He had seen it before, not from a mindless beast, but from something that knew exactly what it was doing. It was testing him. A predator's trial. Holt's muscles coiled. His finger hovered over the trigger. For a split second, neither of them moved. Then the thing struck. It exploded forward, claws slashing. Holt barely dodged in time, the air hissing where its strike had passed. He fired, a burst of plasma rounds searing into its side. The creature shrieked, stumbling back, but only for a second. Then, impossibly, the wounds closed. It was regenerating. Holt's stomach tightened. That was new. A chase begins. The thing moved again, but this time Holt wasn't there. He dove off a ledge, sliding down the steep hillside, mud and leaves kicking up behind him. Above, the creature screeched in frustration. Holt hit the ground running. He wasn't trying to fight it, not alone. He needed to reach his team. Now. The last stand begins. By the time he saw the glow of emergency lights through the trees, his lungs burned from exertion. He burst into the clearing where the other survivors had set up a temporary perimeter. Arden's second-in-command, Sergeant Vance, turned, eyes wide. "Sir? What's?" "Bear is up. Guns ready. It's too me." The squad snapped into position, weapons raised, forming a tight semicircle around the crash site. They didn't hesitate. They knew. They had all heard the stories. They had all seen the bodies. Then the trees behind Holt exploded outward. The creature came for them. And the fight for survival began. The jungle exploded into chaos. Holt barely had time to take cover before the creature was among them, moving like a living shadow, faster than anything that size had a right to be. Fire! The clearing erupted with gunfire. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds slammed into the beast, lighting up the darkness. It shrieked, its camouflage flickering, the plates of its exoskeleton shimmering under the onslaught. But it didn't go down. It adapted. The next time it moved, it wasn't just dodging, it was predicting. Holt watched in horror as it twisted between the shots, using the thick jungle terrain as cover, its movements eerily human. Then it struck. One of the Marines, Private Kessler, barely had time to scream before a clawed limb impaled him through the chest, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. The creature flung his body aside like garbage, already moving toward its next target. Holt's mind raced. They had firepower. But it wasn't enough. This thing wasn't just a brute. It was thinking. And it was winning. Adapt or die, Holt snapped into action. Rake formation. Don't give it a single target. The Marines scattered, forcing the creature to divide its focus. The moment it turned toward one of them, another opened fire from a different angle. For the first time they hesitated. Holt saw his chance. He grabbed a high explosive charge from his belt, arming it as he sprinted toward the creature's flank. One shot. That's all he needed. But the beast saw him. It twisted, lunging straight for him, claws raised. The turning point. Boom. A shot rang out, not from Holt's rifle. From the tree line. A single high-caliber round ripped through the creature's side, sending it staggering backward. Then, another shot. Then another. The beast howled in rage as its regenerating flesh was torn apart by something it couldn't adapt to fast enough. Holt's eyes snapped toward the source. And he saw them. A squad of heavily armed soldiers, their armor marked with the UNSC insignia, emerging from the jungle. Their weapons were custom-built, firing high-density depleted uranium rounds, specifically designed to tear through regenerating targets. One of them, a broad-shouldered figure with a scarred face, lowered his rifle, smirking. "Looks like you could use some backup." Holt didn't even have time to process it before the leader barked an order. "Focus fire. Bring it down." The jungle lit up as every weapon zeroed in on the creature. screeched in agony, staggering backward under the relentless firepower. The beast lashed out, but it was too slow now, wounded, outmaneuvered, and for the first time, outmatched. Holt saw it calculating. And then, with one last defiant snarl, it vanished into the jungle. Gone. But not dead. Not yet. Reinforcements and revelation. Olunasti soldiers quickly secured the area, tending to the wounded. Their leader turned to Holt, offering a gloved hand. "Commander Holt, I presume." Holt gripped it firmly. "Yeah. And you are?" The man gave a tight smirk. "Captain Jace Monroe, Earth Defense Initiative." Holt frowned. "Earth Defense? I didn't think there was anyone left on this planet." Monroe's expression darkened. "We were about to say the same about you." Holt exchanged glances with Arden and the others. The thing wasn't right. Monroe exhaled, looking toward the jungle. "That thing? We fought them before." Asterisk, asterisk, his jaw clenched. "And this planet? Asterisk, asterisk." He turned back to Holt, his expression grim. "It's not the Earth, you remember." Holt's pulse slowed, but the tension didn't fade. The jungle was too quiet now, as if even the wildlife had learned to fear what lurked in the shadows. The apex predator had retreated, but it wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching. And now Holt had bigger questions. He turned to Captain Monroe, eyes narrowed. "Start talking. What do you mean, not the Earth we remember?" Monroe exhaled. "Walk with me." Earth's Forgotten War. Monroe led Holt through the makeshift base his squad had set up in a nearby ruin. It wasn't alien. It was human. Old buildings, reinforced bunkers, overgrown, but still standing. It hit Holt like a gut punch. This wasn't just some lost colony. This was once a city. But it wasn't any city he recognized. Holt stopped, staring at a faded insignia on a rusted outpost wall. The words were barely legible, but they were there. United Earth Federation, Black Site 07. His stomach tightened. The UEF had fallen centuries ago. He turned back to Monroe. "How the hell is there a UEF site on Earth? They abandoned this place before we even left the Sol system." Monroe folded his arms. "That's what they wanted you to believe. The truth buried in time." Arden stepped forward, frowning. "You're saying Earth was never actually lost?" Monroe nodded. "Not lost. Buried. Cut off. The official story was that Earth was uninhabitable. But the truth? The UEF never really left." Holt's jaw tightened. "Then what happened? Where the hell is everyone?" Monroe's face hardened. "A war." A cold weight settled in Holt's gut. Monroe continued. "We were part of the UEF's last stand. They never told the outer colonies, never sent a distress call. We fought, we lost, and they abandoned us." Asterisk, asterisk, his fists clenched. "They left Earth to rot." Asterisk, asterisk. Holt exchanged looks with Arden and the rest of his team. This was insanity. The official records claimed Earth was wiped out by climate disasters, that humanity had been forced to flee into the stars. But if Monroe was telling the truth, then... "What were you fighting?" Holt asked, already fearing the answer. Monroe's gaze flickered toward the jungle. Come. A war never truly won. The apex predators, Monroe said, voice grim. They didn't just show up. They've been here for over 100 years. Arden's expression darkened. You're saying Earth was a war zone before we even left? Monroe nodded. The UEF found something under the ice in Antarctica. Something ancient. They tried to study it, and they woke it up. Holt felt a chill run down his spine. Wasn't just one species, Monroe continued. It was an entire ecosystem, a biosphere designed for war. Once they got loose, they spread like a virus. They overran cities, wiped out armies. Asterisk, asterisk, his face darkened, and we lost. Asterisk, asterisk. Holt exhaled. So the UEF abandoned the survivors. Monroe's jaw tightened. Yeah, the higher-ups sealed off the planet, erased the truth, and left us to die. Silence settled over them. This changed everything. A new hunt begins. Holt finally spoke. That thing we fought, it's not just a survivor, is it? Monroe shook his head. No, it's the next generation. A cold chill ran through Holt's body. Monroe continued. They adapt. Every time we kill one, the next batch gets harder to stop. He met Holt's gaze. That thing isn't just a predator. It's learning. Holt knew what that meant. The next fight wouldn't be the same. The creature had already figured out their tactics. If they didn't stop it soon, it would come back stronger. Harder. And next time, it wouldn't run. The only way out, Holt turned to Monroe. How do we kill it? Monroe hesitated. Then he pointed toward the mountains. There's an old weapons cache, experimental stuff. If it's still intact, it might be enough to put that thing down for good. Asterisk, asterisk, he met Holt's gaze, but it's deep in predator territory. Asterisk, asterisk. Holt glanced at his team. They were bruised, battered, but still standing, still ready. His choice was already made. Then we go hunting. The jungle felt different now. Before, the thick canopy and tangled undergrowth had been an obstacle, a hostile, unknown terrain filled with hidden threats. Now, it was a hunting ground, and Holt wasn't sure if they were the hunters or the prey. March to the mountains. Team moved in silence, their path leading toward the mountains Monroe had pointed out. The terrain was rougher here, the air thicker, and the ground scattered with signs of past battles. Rusted-out vehicles, collapsed bunkers, burned-out skeletons of old war machines, evidence of the UEF's final stand against the monsters they had unleashed. Holt's grip tightened on his rifle. They were walking through a graveyard. Monroe gestured for them to halt, crouching near a cluster of clawed footprints embedded deep in the dirt. Fresh. Holt didn't need to be told what that meant. The creature was ahead of them. Waiting. Watching. The ambush. They reached a narrow valley at the foot of the mountains. The jagged rock formations created a natural bottleneck, good for defense, bad for escape. Was exactly where Holt would stage an ambush, which meant, "It's already here," Arden whispered, scanning the cliffs. Then the air shifted. Something moved, Not one. Not two. Dozens. From the shadows of the cliffs, from the dense brush around them, came the real horror. The apex predator had evolved, and it had made more. Battle in the ravine. TACT. The first beast dropped down, claws flashing. Vance barely had time to raise his weapon before it tore into his armor, sending him sprawling. Gunfire erupted. The clearing became a war zone. Holt fired, his plasma rounds burning through the dark, insectoid bodies. The creatures were stronger now, their exoskeletons resisting direct hits. A second Marine went down. Then a third. KPMOVIND. Monroe shouted. DONTGETPLINED. Holt pivoted, unleashing a grenade into a cluster of creatures. The blast sent bodies flying, but more poured in to take their place. They weren't mindless beasts anymore. They were coordinating, learning. And then Holt saw it. The original. The apex predator. Standing just beyond the chaos, watching. The final hunt begins. Holt's heart pounded. It had brought them here on purpose. It wasn't hunting them. It was testing them. And now it had seen enough. With a chilling, inhuman screech, the apex predator charged. Holt had one chance. He yanked a detonation pack from his belt, arming it in a split second. Then he ran. Straight at the beast. Holt sprinted straight at the beast, detonation pack primed in his grip. The apex predator saw him coming, and this time it didn't dodge. It wanted the challenge. The moment stretched. Holt's boots pounded against the dirt, the battlefield behind him a blur of gunfire, dying screams, and the shrieks of the evolving swarm. The predator lunged. Claws slashed, aiming to gut him mid-stride. Too slow. Holt dropped low, skidding beneath its attack, and slammed the explosive charge against the creature's armored torso. Beep, armed. The beast recoiled, sensing danger. But Holt wasn't done. No escape. Before the predator could rip the bomb off, Holt drew his combat knife and drove it into the joint of its exoskeleton. The blade wedged deep, twisting into soft flesh beneath. The predator screamed, its tail whipping toward him. Holt barely had time to react. He threw himself backward, but not fast enough. And glancing blow from the tail sent shockwaves through his ribs. His armor absorbed most of it, but pain flared hot and sharp. He rolled, ignoring the fire in his chest, and scrambled for cover just as. Boom! The detonation pack went off. Shongle flashed white. The predator howled. When the smoke cleared, the creature still stood. But it was wounded. Its exoskeleton was cracked, greenish-black ichor leaking from the gaping wound in its torso. And for the first time, Holt saw it hesitate. Turning the tide, Monroe and Arden seized the moment. Focus fire, Monroe roared. The entire squad unleashed hell. Armor-piercing rounds, asterisk plasma bursts, grenades, asterisk everything they had. The apex predator snarled, trying to retreat, but Holt saw the truth. It wasn't invincible. It had always won before, because no one had ever hit back this hard. Not until now. The end of the apex. The beast staggered, its limbs trembling. It snapped its head toward Holt, locking eyes with him, not as prey, not as an inferior species, but as a rival. A final defiant snarl. N-C-R-I-C-T. A single shot rang out. Monroe's sniper round punched through its skull, and the creature collapsed. Learnt. Still. For the first time, the jungle was quiet. The swarm of lesser creatures froze. Then, as if sensing their alpha was gone, they vanished back into the darkness. Holt let out a breath. It was over. Victory on a dead world. The team regrouped, bloody but alive. Holt stared down at the dead predator, his chest heaving. They had won. But it didn't feel like victory. Monroe knelt beside the corpse, grim. This was just one. Holt nodded, and there are more. More predators. More hidden threats. And the buried truth of a war humanity never knew was still fighting. Arden stepped up beside him. So what now? Holt clenched his fist. We take Earth back.